I am sure will be one of the most pivotal conversations on the future of African American studies that many of us have been blessed to hear and partake in. The context for our conversation will be just that. It will be a conversation between two of the foremost thinkers on the question of African people, both in the so-called New World and throughout the diaspora, and as well as the African experience itself. It is my honor and humble privilege to be able to moderate this panel. We're going to open up. I asked the brothers how they wanted me to introduce them, and they kind of looked at me like, come on, brother. People know who we are. And so, without further ado, I'm going to invite, well, first let me say just a word, if I may. I've lived in the city of Philadelphia now for almost 25 years. And in terms of the question of who we are as African people in the ivory tower and the struggles that has meant over these years, the universities of Temple and the University of Pennsylvania have held sway. And many of us who've been in this city have witnessed that battle unfold on those respective campuses. And so it is most fitting that we have with us Dr. Molefi Asante and Dr. Tukufu Zuberi with us this day to have this conversation in particular. I'm going to invite our two brothers to share. I'm going to ask Brother Zuberi to open up and just give what I'm assuming are going to be his opening remarks, and then I asked Dr. Asante to share his opening remarks, and we will then engage the audience, possibly give time for the two of them to engage each other as well. Is that all right, family?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, brother. I want to thank my brother, Montiero, for inviting me to participate in this conversation. It is a pleasure. He is one of my champions, and I've always had a pleasure of working with him and struggling with him around some of these issues, and especially around the issue of the place of DuBois in the academy more generally, and in the universe more specifically. I want to just start by talking about when I met Brother Asante. I was in a library, and I was trying to do one of those all-nighters, when you sneak in the library before you got a family and you spend all night in there reading books. And so there I found Brother Asante laying down flat on the bookshelf. And I picked him up and began a process of engagement, of intellectual thought. He provoked me in ways that sometimes it made me mad and sometimes it made me happy. And then I got into this place where I dare he say these things because they were challenging almost everything that I was in the process of learning. So meeting him on that platform, in that place, put him in a conversation with ancestors who had long come before him and established a tradition of intellectual battle, intellectual fortitude and strength that I think is what highlights what we want Africana studies to be, what we want African American studies to be. Because there are many people who are part of African American studies, part of Africana studies, part of Black studies, part of this entire rubric, who are not doing the work that the tradition demands of them. But Brother Asante has been doing that for a long time, and this was Afrocentric idea, and if you keep up with Brother Asante, you know that was many, some people say many moons ago, that was many books ago. But that book helped shape my intellectual development and my intellectual career and my intellectual vocation, because he was challenging Eurocentrism, and I was studying Eurocentrism, because everything at the universities that I went to was about Eurocentrism. And that dominance of Eurocentrism was perverting everybody's mind. Everybody was being made stupid. Nobody was being prepared for the future world that we need. And indeed, if we kind of take a quick look at the planet that we're living on, we see that there are individuals who have lots of power, who are destroying our earth and destroying our capability to renew ourselves and our earth. And they are doing this in the name of science, in the name of progress, and in our name, the name of humanity. Afrocentrism set out as a challenge to the basis of this very idea, what a human being is, what the relationship of the human being is to our universe. And by doing that, it set the scale for Eurocentrism just totally out of whack. Because if you engage in the debate and you know it's there, you really, I think you only have two choices. You can get dumb, or you can begin to challenge Eurocentrism for all that it is about. Unless you're just a liar. Now, if you're just a liar, then you're just going to bring lies, and you're going to bring lies, and you're going to bring them, and they will come out of your mouth. And you know, now this is the academy, and we know that there are entire disciplines that are based on lies. Some of those disciplines are so based on lies, they develop languages which do not allow you to understand what they're saying.
That's right.
And if you figure out what they're saying, you find out they ain't said that. So the battle against that deception is what we come to offer. Because imagine this. For the establishment of the tradition of the academy is based on a lie, is based on a deception, is based on oppression, is based on domination, is based on exploitation. Once you get a tradition that is grounded in that, you get what the academy is. So that means your sociology is Eurocentric distortion. Your economics, Eurocentric distortion. Your political science, Eurocentric distortion. And we could go on and on and on. Now, the thing is we have a long tradition of saying, basically, there are very simple corrections to these lies. Because the lies may be complicated, they may be complex, but the corrections are actually quite clear. In order to get out of Eurocentrism, one of the key things we need to do is we need to bring the voices of everyone else back into the conversation. We need to know what Asians are saying, their struggles, what they are thinking, their traditions, and how that thought has developed over the years. We need to know what the indigenous folks all over the Americas have been thinking, how they have been fostering their thought, and how they have been doing what they have been doing. And especially we have to know what the first group of people which populated the planet before we migrated everywhere else and created all these other people, what do these Africans think? And how have they developed their thought? Now, and when I say develop their thought, what I mean is their thought in battle with this international, worldwide movement of Eurocentric domination of intellectual activity. And that happens everywhere. That's why, you know, we were at a conference many years ago, and they were holding, this was a conference at a deaf school for the deaf in Washington, D.C. It was one of the National Association of Black Studies, I believe it was. And there was a conference, we had a panel on the future of the future of the African university. And we engaged basically in a debate about there's not an African university on the planet because of the nature of the universities on the African continent, which resulted from the Eurocentric domination of intellectual enterprise, academic enterprises, wherever they happen. And that domination continues on today. Now the solution is clear. We need to bring in these other voices, and we need to cease the distortion of knowledge which has paraded around as Eurocentrism. It doesn't call itself Eurocentrism. It'll call itself scientific. It'll call itself the humanities. It'll call itself many things, anything. It'll call itself anything. But these are simply, you know, the wolf going around in sheep's clothing. And in reality, they have perpetuated a way of thought which does not help us solve problems. It does not help us solve problems. They have created many forms of information which allow us to say a lot, and it even allows us to engage in activities. But what we say and the activities we engage in do not solve those problems. There's an entire field of study called development studies. It includes economics, anthropology, political science, a whole bunch of stuff. But it is not about the development of anybody. It is about the maladjustment and the underdevelopment of everybody, to the advantage and benefit of a few. Now those kinds of distortions are the things that we have been fighting against. I just want to say, I'll say this and then I'll stop and give my elder brother a chance to educate me some more. And I just want to say this, our struggle comes out of our Africana studies, as I see it, is a beautiful thing because it's not like other disciplines. It's not like other forms of thought. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a really good thing. It's not like sociology. It's not like economics. And it's not like history. And the reason it's not like them is because it comes out of that struggle to redefine humanity. That struggle that we call the independence movement in Africa, that struggle that we call the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, that all of these struggles were attempting to redefine what we say a human being is. Now, we were going to do it, and we were saying things like Black Power. We were going around telling ourselves we're Africans and nothing else. All of these efforts were efforts to redefine what it means to be a human. And why did we need to do that? Because what it means to be a human has been distorted. We've been racialized, marginalized, and shoved off to the side so that they can have conversations of who we are and what we are, and make us responsible for some of the distortions of what's going on. And I think this is really, really important for us to recognize. Because if we recognize it, if we recognize that here is a discipline which comes out of the effort to transform the very nature of the academy, then you will understand the nature of the struggles that we have. The reason that our struggle, when we have struggles on these campuses, it be the president and the provost and the dean. He's like, can we smash them now? Can we get rid of them now? Is it time now? You know, and it don't matter where the program at. It can be Harvard, it can be Temple, it can be Penn, it can be
same issue.
It'll be the same thing. And every single one of the top administrators, the boards of trustees, and we know we smart. We got friends in the boards of trustees. We got friends in the provost's office, the president's office. They go to smack us. We already know they're coming. But the fact is that since we come out of this tradition of struggle, and they know it, they know we will never be like history, like political science, like sociology, because we will always be trying to connect our intellectual enterprise to the struggle of our people to redefine the landscape in which we live, in which we exist. That's the importance of Africana studies. And that's the Africana studies of the 21st century. When you see us not doing this, it's temporary. It is temporary. I guarantee you, if you see us not struggling on any place, it is temporary. And the reason it's temporary is just because all someone has to do is study the history of Africana studies. And if you're in that, you might accidentally do it. And you can be as conservative as you are, you're going to accidentally hire somebody who is not. And they're going to bring that struggle there. And they're going to demand the attention of whatever that particular department, whatever that particular program, whatever they're calling it at that place, that they engage in this struggle. And the nature of the struggle, let's be clear, so that you don't misunderstand it. What I don't mean is a struggle organized by the Democratic Party. Look, the brother from Kenya, I love Kenya. I've been there many times. I love Chicago. I've been there many times. I've been to Hawaii. I've been to Kansas. I've been to all these places. But it is not a struggle that has been organized by the Democratic Party. We have a long tradition of, look, we were fighting against the Democratic Party when the Democratic Party was fighting for us to be slaves. So we ain't gonna forget the history of the Democratic Party just because you bring somebody who's a brother in there to be the leader of it. So the nature of the struggle that I am talking about is one which is attempting to redefine what America is, and has always been working to redefine what America is. You know, if you think Africa's been engaged in this current phase of independence for about the last 50 years, just imagine and look at the United States 50 years after independence. It's 1826. What's happening? We slaves. Our people are enslaved all over the United States, and we're fighting against it, but we're enslaved. So this place is a despotic situation. It's a very dirty place to be. It's a very evil place to be. That's 50 years after independence. You don't find that level of enslavement anywhere on the African continent. So we need to raise serious questions even when we address how we're going to approach the problems that exist in Africa, and to what extent we're going to understand the nature of the relationship of those problems to the current successes of the United States, the successes of China, the successes of everywhere else on planet Earth. And this is the task of Africana studies, to understand what democracy is supposed to mean in the United States, in Brazil, in Colombia, wherever we find people, and to chart out ways that these problems can be integrated into our worldwide struggle to redefine what it means to be a human, what democracy is, what kind of economy we need, what kind of politics we need, so forth and so on. Wow. Thank you.
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah. Hotel. You know, after listening to my brother, Tukufu Zuberi, I am almost speechless because he has covered so many of the bases. I am certainly delighted to be on the program with him. He is a giant in African studies, having reached the pinnacle of demographic studies of the African continent. If you don't know his work, he is the leading authority in that field. The University of Pennsylvania has not succeeded in really taming him, but we're really happy that he's in our city and that he has chosen to come to this incredible DuBois conference that has been organized and founded by Dr. Tony Montero. We welcome you here at Temple University, the People's University. And we want to say that I'm really happy to be on this program, because I know Brother Osayande will correct anything that we both say that is incorrect. And so this is a wonderful occasion, and we give a great shout out to Sister Sakaria Rhodes, one of the organic champions of our people, and to Sister Pam Africa. We're with the people, the students for first time you're with really some of the organic leaders of the African American community. We welcome them here. Our problem in terms of Africana studies is a continuing problem, and it's a problem of white racial domination in all sectors of the American society. That is the struggle. There's no other struggle than that. That is the only struggle, because if it were not for that struggle, if it were not for white racial domination, then we would not even have thought of the necessity for black studies. But when I went to school at the University of California, a branch of the school that Dr. Zuberi also attended, and the University of California was an institution that was designed to make anyone who goes to the University of California basically the best white boy or white girl you could make them. They were expert at that. And I'm sure the Temple is the same, unless you had African American studies. But that was a process. So you didn't learn any theorists who were black. You didn't learn any theorists who were Asian or any theorists who were Mexican. It was fundamentally an institution designed to protect and to build upon the structure of white domination. And that's where we found a big problem as students, because we said, wait a minute, this is not correct. You know, I mean, I know some smart black people. You know what I mean? At least they ought to have one or two in the class. If you're taking psychology and you're not studying any African American theorists in the psychology department, something's wrong. There are great psychologists and there are great thinkers on the psych in the African world. Why not? If you're studying poetry and you have not been introduced to African poets, African American poets, there's a problem. And how can you go through Temple University or any university in the Western world and declare competence in music and never have studied Duke Ellington, the most prolific composer in the history of America? Yes, you get a degree in music. I got a degree in music. You never heard of Duke Ellington? Isn't that insane? There's more. In 1915, DuBois told you. Told Tony, I know Tony. This is the greatest DuBois promoter, I guess, of the 21st century. You can't, if you're in his class, you cannot escape DuBois. That's it. And he's correct, because no one can escape DuBois. If you're a contemporary intellectual, how are you going to escape DuBois? In 1915, though, DuBois wrote a book called The Negro. Now, this is an interesting book. For our discourse here today, it's a very fascinating book. Because in The Negro, in 1915, DuBois lays out what might be considered a nascent blueprint for a discussion of Africana studies. This is a profound thing. And when you read it, you say, wow, he had all this knowledge and information. Let me tell you what he did. Well, and Tony, you know this. I'm also critical of DuBois, right? He was wrong in one aspect, right? But his vision was correct. The aspect where he was wrong, and then I'll tell you what he did right, was that and this is 1915, you have to understand, 1915, we don't know a lot about Africa. In 1915, in this country, we don't know a lot about the black world, so to speak. There are many things we do know. And we don't know a lot about the origin of human beings. So Du Bois makes this critical error here. And the critical error is one that says that African people came from Asia. It's a critical error, but that was the thinking of the time in 1915, that obviously human beings did not come from Africa. They came from Asia. And so he argues that 50,000 years ago, human beings came out of Asia and into Africa, and then 30,000 years ago, human beings came from the Mediterranean part of Europe into Africa. Now we know that's totally incorrect, right? Because what do we know? We know that the origin of Homo sapiens 250,000 years ago is in East Africa. We know that. And what do we know? We know that hominids, the first hominids, 7 million years ago in Chad, Sahelanthropus chadensis, 7 million years ago, we know that fossil is African. And we also know that before 70,000 years ago, everybody in the world was black. This is what science tells us now, right? And that DNA of every person, 7 billion people in the world, the DNA is traced back to the African continent. We know that. We know science now, right? Problem is that with Du Bois's statement about Asia, it confused a lot of people in the African American community. And that's why we got the Nation of Islam and Farrakhan saying Asiatic black man. Because they haven't come out of 1915. They read Du Bois, said Du Bois said it, so it must be right, you know? But Du Bois was wrong on that. And that was a critical error. But it was not an error that was intentional. He was just a man who amassed all of the knowledge he could amass at that time. And when he wrote it down, and then somebody 50 years later takes it up and says, this is the truth, becomes a problem. Because Du Bois wrote before Leakey. Du Bois wrote before Cheikh Anta Diop. Du Bois wrote before Rebecca Cann and Alan Wilson with their DNA studies, you see? So that's why we have that issue. Now, here's the point. Here's where he's great. Masterful. In 1915, Du Bois, not Cheikh Anta Diop, who would come later in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, it was Du Bois who claimed Egypt as the fountain of African civilization. Go back and read the Negro. He said, the greatest civilization in the ancient world is palpably black, Negro, ancient Egypt. It's 1950. We don't get Cheikh Anta Diop saying this till the 1960s. And everybody go to Cheikh Anta Diop. Well, Cheikh Anta Diop, and that we really, why are we dealing with Egypt? Well, Du Bois dealt with Egypt. But he didn't just deal with Egypt. He dealt with every civilization in Africa. He dealt with Merowe in Sudan. He dealt with Napata in Sudan. All this is in the same book. He showed, and this is what his great path, his great ability was to demonstrate that the African world had basically been marginalized and had been actually peripheralized by this notion of European domination. That's why I say this is the big pattern. Now, why does Du Bois do this? Because Du Bois sees what is out there. He sees a world where the European experience is positioned as if it is universal. So if the European says man in the 19th century, they're talking about European man. If the European writes about how urban development should succeed or proceed. They say, oh, this is Europe. This is a European example. We're not talking about Africans. We're talking about European example. Everything is Europe, see? So this is why what Professor Zuberi says about Africa is very important, about universities. 3 weeks ago, I was in Ewuare, South Africa, right? At the Thabo Mbeki Institute. And we were debating this question. And I told them precisely the same thing. No, in Africa, we don't have African universities. We have European universities in Africa run by African people. They still use the same curriculum the European colonialists used. They have the same structures. In fact, on some of the campuses, they still have the images and the monuments of the European who colonized them. In Brazzaville, for example, the home of our great Dr. Theophile Obenga, they're building the largest monument in Africa to a white man. Brazza. A destroyer of Africans. So yeah, there's a confusion here. But here's what I think, and I won't be much longer with this, but here's my situation with Africana studies. The future of this field has to be a field where any interpretation of African phenomena starts with Africans. That has to be the future of the field. There's no other future for us. You can't start an interpretation of African phenomena from a Chinese point of view. You start it with you can't start it with a European point of view. You have to start it with an African point of view. And if you do that, you already have a revolution. Everything is different. The whole world looks differently. You say, wow, how can this be that we have this revolution in our thinking? Our thinking is revolutionized by virtue of our critical understanding of ideas. Now let me just take this. This is very important. You have African people in Colombia, African people in Peru, in Ecuador, in Brazil, in Venezuela. The great son of Africa, Hugo Chavez, may he rest in peace. You have incredible spirit of African people throughout you have more Africans in Brazil than you have twice as many Africans in Brazil as in the United States. And when I was down in Brazil in November, it was the same thing. You know what? Hundreds of black people in Brazil fighting against white racial domination. When you're in Colombia, what are black people fighting against? White racial domination. If you're in South Africa, what are black people fighting against? White racial domination. It's the same. So what is the future of Africana studies? The future of Africana studies has to be to undermine every instance of white racial domination, because white racial domination adds to conflict and chaos in the world. But we must not just stop there. We must also undertake an attack on the whole corporate structure that has created the infrastructure that allows white racial domination to be sustained. This is why it's sustained. I mean, if you go to a place like Sudan, we got another issue. And this is, I'm going to say this, and I know this is all tied up in it, but I need to say this. We got Arab racial domination. I know, okay, assalamu alaikum. But we got Arab racial domination in Sudan. And when we were called, before we were confused, we would say, you know, there's a religious war in Sudan. No, there's no religious war in Sudan. In Sudan, you have Muslims fighting against Muslims. Some Muslims consider themselves Arabs, and some consider themselves Africans. The ones who consider themselves Arabs want the ones who consider them Africans to be Arabs. And the ones who are Africans said, we don't want to be Arabs. We're fine being Muslims, but we also fine being Africans. We have never yet identified that as Arab racism. Because in the African American community, we have many Muslims. And we have the tradition of the Nation of Islam. So nobody wants to deal with that. But we deal with white racism, even though most of y'all in here are Christians. Just like the white people. We can deal with, y'all can talk about white racism, but when it comes to Arab racism, you don't want to talk about that. Africana studies in the 21st century must deal with all the issues that marginalize African people. That's what we have to do. Now, I'm going to bring this around, but I want to just talk about here at Temple, because people want to hear about Temple, so you need to know about Temple. At Temple University, in the heart of the African American community in Philadelphia. North Philadelphia is in the heart of the African American community. This is a historic community. People don't realize it. The building where we're sitting right now, this is sitting on property where African people lived on this property for years, decades. They tore the houses down to build these two buildings, Gladfelter Hall and Anderson Hall. They tore black people's houses down, moved them out. And they created, in the 1960s, something called the charrette, which has never been followed by Temple University. And that was an agreement with the African American community around here, how they would treat the African American people. That's never been followed. You ask people about the charrette. And what the charrette did was also preserve certain spaces for the African American community. Those spaces have been eaten up now by different buildings. Because the people who created the charrette with Temple University in the 1960s and 70s, they're no longer here. Even the administrators who did it are no longer here. So people don't remember. But I remember when I came here in 1984, they said in 1984, hey, there should be a garden, an African-American garden, community garden out there. That small space is still preserved between Diamond and Norris. But everything else is taken up. It's gone. So what is our intellectual struggle? Our intellectual struggle at Temple is the same as it was when I was a student at UCLA. It is the same struggle that we had, I'm sure, that they've had at the University of Pennsylvania. The institution wants to preserve itself as a white racial hierarchical institution. The African Americans in the institution want to make it an institution that is more universally acceptable to all people. That is the big conflict. That's always going to be your conflict. You're gonna sit across the table from some administrator at a university. Could be a black person who's white. You got them too. We got them too. In fact, you got black people who speak up more for white people and a white institution than white people. They'll take that charge and they'll speak up. They're defending all of this white. It's Clarence Thomas. I call it Clarenceization. You know, the process. I'm serious. You know, I used to think that Clarence Thomas I couldn't understand Clarence. But the process of Clarenceizing the African mind, this is something that we see all the time. It's a Clarenceization process. And because of this process, where the victim speaks up to defend the institution, even more than the institution will speak up to defend itself, then it confuses the situation. You have to step back and look and watch and see what's going on. This is why when we look at Brother Obama, and we say, boy, when he was going into office, we had so many hopes. Because yeah, he was going to bring in this progressive agenda that we know all African people say, yes, brother can do it. And he got in there and he saw the empire. And then he became the leader of the empire.
That's right, correct. Teach.
When you're the leader of the empire, you must do what the empire wants you to do. And this is what happens, of course, when you have sometimes African Americans in the corporation or in the institution in positions of power and influence. They got to preserve their jobs. And if their job is to smack you, they'll smack you. Because they have to demonstrate to the people above them that they're willing to defend white racial domination. So what is our battle? Our battle is both on campus and off campus. The survival of Africana studies will not be because of universities, but because of the community.
That's right.
And it will be in the community as it has been before. Before we start having the Africana studies on these major white campuses, we had intellectuals. We call them lay, now they call them lay scholars. What's a lay scholar? It's a person who has not been blessed by the white institution. So John Henry Clark, Dean of African American Studies, a lay scholar. Joseph Ben Yuckonen, who Temple fired, he was on this faculty. Temple University fired Joseph Ben Yuckonen, a lay scholar. John Jackson, a great scholar. J.A. Rogers is a lay scholar. We've always had them. I grew up on these people. These were the works that I read. So when you have that kind of individual, like individuals like these people, you have them in all spaces throughout the African world. They create the institution. Abdias do Nascimento, for many years in Brazil, was a lay scholar. He was not blessed by any university, but he was a major force, and his spirit and presence is to this day overwhelming in Brazil among those who are now being educated in the universities. They all refer back to Abdias do Nascimento, you see. So what's the future of Africana Studies? The future of Africana Studies is actually in your hands.
These were two, I feel, quite remarkable presentations by my dear brothers. I want to take moderator's privilege here and ask the first set of questions.
I thought you were going to say something.
I have nothing at all to add on to that, brother. But I want, and I'm hoping that as you were listening, you were taking copious notes like the good students we all are, and that you are ready to engage our dear brothers in conversation on the question of the future of African studies. Both of you have done tremendous work in not just the field of African studies, understanding that the root of African American studies is the continent itself. Recently, Dr. Zuberi, you have been involved in a documentary project that has looked at the liberation movement, or I should say, looked at the current state of Africa through the lens of the Pan-Africanist anti-colonial movements of the late 60s, early 70s. I would like for you to share with us your observations of your experience in the development of the documentary, and what lessons have you gleaned from that experience that can speak to the future of African American studies?
So, so my mind is reeling like y'all's from just hearing what the brother said. So I want to ask him some questions, but I'm going to ask you no question first. So for me, it is always very important to find the way to put yourself in the struggle and to facilitate the use of your knowledge and experience by the struggle. And so that's always been very important for me. When I was an undergraduate and a graduate student, that's what I did. I mean, you know, I was one of those students who got good grades but didn't go to class. And the reason I wasn't going to class is because I needed to be engaged in the struggle. I needed to be, if there was that protest that needed to be had, but nobody was doing it, I needed to work with those who were going to organize that protest. If it was time and I'm going around screaming, I was telling people they were Africans long before I ever set foot on the African continent. And then one day I decided, you had an argument with somebody, they said, you ain't never been to Africa. And I said, okay, I'm going to Africa so I can come back and tell you you're African. And, you know, but that for me, that has always been important. When I was getting ready to go to the university, after I go to graduate school, after I graduated from undergraduate school, I talked to this one guy named Bob Brown, who was a member of this political organization I was involved with, and another guy named Kwame Ture, who was involved in this organization. I said, well, what should I do? I've been accepted in all these law schools, these political science departments, these sociology departments, what have you. What should I do to best facilitate me contributing to transforming the world that we're in, which is what I see as my job in this particular space. So I say that to say, not to dwell on what their answer was, because their answer was good for me, because it sent me through a lot of experiences would help me end up right here. But that when I look at what and how I do my scholarship, I use that as my stick, my barometer. And a few years ago, I was offered an opportunity to do something in television. And I debated whether I would do it or not, because I don't have much respect for much of what I see on television, most of what I see on television. And so, but I thought that this will allow me to get in a space that I've not been in, and it will allow me to develop an ability to use the capacity of communicating through this. Because, you know, I have written a few books, and I know that the members of my family back in Oakland, California, that they know more about my work from looking at the few things I've said on television than I've said in those books. So this is a very powerful medium to me. And I wanted to learn the best way to do it. That is, I understand the power of those who control and disseminate broadcast media, but I wanted to learn how to use that medium to effectively deliver messages that I think are important for people to understand. And so I basically went to school for about 10 years to learn how to do that. And in the process, I was on a program which is called the History Detectives, which is still on television. So in learning that, I learned a lot about broadcast, a lot about how to make film, et cetera, et cetera. And then I began in the process of making my own film. And so I started this trek around 2005, which is when I started working on this first project. And the thing that I knew is that the best way for me to do it is to find the voice of the people who I'm talking about. So I want to talk about the African independence movement. And so I went and I've talked to, I spent that time filming and talking to freedom fighters. I'm talking to some of those freedom fighters, won and became heads of state and did things that some people criticized them for. Some of them became, they're not heads of state. Some of them are out, way out. You got to go find them, and you done forgot their name, forgot they did this. They ain't in the history books, and all they ain't being taught at the school, the whole thing. But you go find them and you talk to them. And I went and I talked to a lot of these people. And in fact, when I first started the film, I said, well, I'm going to do a film on what do Africans who were involved in the liberation struggle think about the world and the relationship between the world and Africa. But after I started doing that, they retitled the film for me, because all of them talked about two essential things: the African independence movement and how that movement will not have reached its culmination until it is the United States of Africa.
Right.
And so, you know, now I didn't expect to find that, because, you know, who you hear talking about the United States of Africa besides Molefi Asante? Anybody going around saying, United States of Africa gonna solve the problem of our kids getting in schools, gonna solve the problem of our boys going to jail. You don't hear that, but this was a crescendo of voices. You know, and in the film, I only used a fraction of the interviews that we actually took, but in using those interviews, I built this whole film around those voices. So it's not a film where Tukufu Zuberi talks about African independence. Yes. It's a film where Tukufu Zuberi attempts, and whether I'm successful or not, you all will tell me. He attempts to channel some of the voices, because it's not all of the voices that could have been there.
That's right.
And I couldn't cover the entire African continent,
Sure.
but I took those voices and I presented them in this particular film. And at first, I had a particular station which was way behind it. They expect me to come out with a nice history detective version of African independence. It didn't turn out that way, and so they are not broadcasting it yet. I'm not criticizing them. Maybe they will, but they're not talking about broadcasting it yet. And but maybe they will get some courage, because the African film, there's a whole films festival circuit that's out there, which is run by African Americans. And those folks are totally fired up about this film. I submit the film, they're like, this is the greatest documentary, blah, 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 right? And that in itself has been a reward to making this particular film. But also, I made the film because what we typically do not get in film, we have exceptions, but what we typically do not get in film is an interpretation of African history and African society, which says something good about what Africans did.
Right.
It's kind of simple-minded, but we don't get that. Yeah. You get award-winning films on how Africans are doing every problem in Africa. I'm not denying there are problems in Africa. Sure. Africa's got problems. Sure. Okay? Sure. Africa, but where are those films which highlight the successes, which give things to inspire for more success? Right. And I'm not saying we should ignore problems, and I don't try to do that in the film, but I'm attempting to do in the film is to educate people about what I would define as one of the most important things to happen on the African continent in the 20th century, and that is the African independence movement. Because this was a direct challenge to Eurocentric domination, white supremacy on the African continent. And it is something which is not finished as a project, but it is one of those essential things that we don't hear much about. And it's kind of like it's the whole Black Power movement. You don't hear much about it. It became the Civil Rights Movement, and the whole notion of what was going on with those who were talking about Black Power versus those who were talking about just civil rights, those who were talking about Pan-Africanism. All that's been washed away to the nice Civil Rights Movement in terms of what we hear. But we need to tell these stories, and we need to tell them by using the voices of those who engaged in the struggle. Now, sometimes you ain't gonna find all those voices because people die. And you still have to use the medium, though, in ways which effectively tell the story. And so what I attempted to do was further develop a language by which you do that, and develop a process by which you do it. And so, my son, who's sitting here, Zuberi, he became my principal partner in this process. That's good. I mean, we filmed all over the place, in places you wouldn't believe, waited days and days to interview some guys who would not ultimately give the interview once they figured out what we were really talking about. But we did all that stuff, but in the same time, we're trying to develop a process that can be easily emulated, because it is important to master this language. That's right. Okay? It's kind of like, you got to recognize that they invented a press, and it revolutionized reading. Yes. It revolutionized reading. Now, they've invented a medium that has revolutionized how we receive most of our information. We may not like it. It may not be the best thing, but that's what it's doing. In fact, if you want to take somebody to a book, the gateway of it is through this medium. More people read something when Oprah Winfrey say it on her video program than anything else. So mastering these mediums of communication are essential for the 21st century. Africana studies has to be on the edge of this. I mean, you know, and so that's why I have chosen to get so involved in filmmaking. And, you know, in our process is whenever we film 2 films. So we already filmed the second one, and we're about to start filming the third and the fourth one. And our other process was, how do you get around spending $1 million? Because you don't have to spend $1 million. The whole technological revolution means you can produce a program, a video, of the same quality, of the best documentary that you've ever seen, or the best narrative film that you've ever seen, for a fraction of the cost. That's right. My first couple of years starting on this project, I was chasing money. And I was chasing money because I thought I needed that money, because that's what they told me. You need this much money because you got to pay this many people. And I was like, wow, these people are making a good living. I chased that money for a good period of time till finally I said, no. Why do I need that money? I just need to buy this camera, buy this thing. And you know, and when we began the process, I would connect Zuberi with some of those people that I had met in the history detectives to just get some seasoning, to get his whole level of expertise up. Once he hit that, we were off running then. That's when we were smoking. And the whole kind of price of the thing just drops out. And I think we need to learn those lessons and share those lessons.
That's right.
Can I just, I just want to you know, affirm the significance of that, but I just want to point out something that's extremely important about what Dr. Zuberi said. When I was in South Africa, Thabo Mbeki gave us a litany of things that he felt that had not been achieved when he was president of South Africa. And one of the things that he said was that they had not revolutionized the educational structure. And I asked him a question, and also some of the members of the ANC who had been ministers of government. And I asked them, do you have in your curriculum a course in elementary school and in secondary school and in college that talks about the struggle for independence? They said no. I said, well, how do you expect children to know anything about what y'all did? Because they were complaining. They said, well, they have a word, and I'm sure you've heard Tukufu. They have a word called born free, the term, born free. That means those who were born after Mandela came out of jail. The ones who were born free, born after Mandela came out of prison, are lost. They're in a situation, an economic situation that's as horrible as it was under apartheid, but they have no history or consciousness of struggle. Because the generation before did not give them a lesson in what it took to overcome apartheid. And I think such a film as this would be fantastic.
So I went, and this is so fundamental for South Africa. And the discussion, so one of the discussions in South Africa is, did they have an independence movement? Because the Boers claim that they had the first independence movement on the African continent in their fight against the British. And that their movement was the first successful movement. So I went and talked to de Klerk and allowed him to articulate those words because I wanted to hear them say that. And that's important. Because in South Africa you will find a lot of intellectuals who will argue with you that that's true. You will find a lot of members of the ANC who will argue with you that that is true, that they didn't have an independence movement. I had to go find a statement in 1961 where Nelson Mandela simply said, we are fighting for political independence, okay? Because that's not the rhetoric he
That's
was
not
using
right. I
after
see.
he came out of
That's
jail
true.
in 1991.
That's
Now,
right.
and I think all of this is important because if you don't say you're a part of an independence movement, you rewrite the history of South Africa. If you do not recognize that this movement was attempting to undo something, you begin to rewrite the whole history of colonialism so that some people will come back. And I'm telling you, this ain't, some people will come back and start saying, well, solution to Africa's problem is recolonization.
Yeah.
And there are people who have
Who
been
said
talking about that. They write book. They are willing to write a book and put their name on the front of the book and have their photograph on the internet talking about the recolonization of Africa as a way of solving Africa's problems. You have some people who will say that there is nothing good that has come out of the independence movement, that Africa is worse today than it was before the independence movement. And it's important because if we didn't make any progress, what have we been doing? If we didn't overcome something, where are we actually at? And so I think that, so for me, it was tremendously important to start, as my brothers say, on the African continent, in even talking about how do we define what struggle is about. That is so fundamentally important because what we get are these interpretations of our history which do not have us standing up to redefine what it means to be a human being. And believe me, the definition of Africans as human beings in the academy is a recent thing, but in our struggle doing it is transformed the ways that they think about what democracy is, what they think about what freedom is, what they think about what justice is. And the important thing to recognize, because look, when people see us as an element of inferiority, they don't just do it in the United States. They don't just do it in Africa. You find people, they say we inferior. People make dolls about our inferiority in Japan. And they don't even need to see us. They just need to hear about it. They make the doll, give it to their kid, raise their kid thinking about how inferior we are. That's the power of white supremacy. If we're going to fight it, we have to fight it with affirming information which transforms how we think about the potential of Africans.
I understand you have a question. You want to go? You want to leave? You can go, Stuart. All right.
I'll bring it.
Okay. So I would like to invite the audience. If you have a question, raise your hand. I will acknowledge you. I'm going to ask that you would, if you would like to, introduce yourself, direct your question to the person you would wish for it to be answered by, and we will take it from there. Okay.
How y'all doing? My name is Anthony Daniels. I'm a PhD student in the Department of African American Studies. I'd like to thank Doctors Asante and Zuberi for what you've done today. Not only a commitment to the community, but also a commitment to the discipline. My question is a disciplinary question. In terms of looking at African American studies as a discipline, what are some of your insights in terms of the way it may impact other disciplines in the academy? Right? So not the academy overall, right? Maybe something specifically, either one or two disciplines, or disciplines in general. But how do you think that the discipline of African American studies in the future, or even now, is or will impact other disciplines?
Well, if I could just give it a quick answer, I think it's going to be in a number of ways. I think one is we're already seeing it in language itself. You know, I mean, if people in sociology no longer talk about the culturally deprived, it's because we've had an impact on language. If people increasingly do not use the term minority, it's because we've had an impact on language. We also had an impact on factual information. I mean, you don't hear people saying Columbus discovered America anymore. That's because of us. It's our discipline. We insisted on that, right? I think we will also, in a methodological sense, we will even raise questions about this notion of predictive methodology. Because the whole notion in the Western world for prediction was to be able to control people. So the idea of control and the idea of prediction, these things will come increasingly, they will become increasingly criticized by Afrocentric scholars who began to look at other ways of gathering information and data. And those other ways will come out of the historically and culturally patterned ways that African people for thousands of years have gathered information. I mean, African people were not sitting around in villages or in towns not gathering information. I mean, after all, I mean, the invention of medicine and of philosophy and all these things, I mean, people had to think about that. These were thoughts that were going on. I mean, so how do they do that? And what we have not done is we have rarely interrogated the way that our people came into knowledge. And I had a wonderful discussion with a young brother who's going to be in our master's and PhD program from Sudan. It's your young brother. He just got accepted into Temple, Martin Bupa. And we were talking about Sudan. We were talking about his people. And I said, well, you know, there must be people in your ethnic group who have information. And he said, oh, yeah, they have. I said, well, why hasn't it been written? He said, I'm going to write it. So that's him. That's the guy right there. He's going to write about the Udu. So it's very important to have people who have now begun to look internally and to discover that. So I think that in a disciplined way, we have also, we did language, we do method, and I think theoretically we've got to start theorizing from the vantage point of African people as subjects of history, rather than being marginals, rather than being interpreted as, unfortunately, some people in sociology have interpreted us as problems. You see what I'm saying? We've got to I mean, if there are problems for us, it's the white people. They're the problem. We're not the problem. You know what I'm saying? It's not a problem that Africans have. We're not the problems in America. The problems in America are these people who believe that racism is normal. I mean, when you have accepted the idea that you can be normal, you can be a racist and still be normal, that's a problem. And we got to deal with that.
Hello, my name is Zuberi. I'm an undergraduate student here. I started off with a major in political science, but to supplement my education, I joined the African American Studies Department. And I've gotten such a breadth of knowledge here. I want to thank all of you for being here today. I wanted to ask Dr. Asante, you described a situation in South Africa where South African children may not be as inspired to join the cultural resistance due to miseducation or the omission of knowledge about the African independence movement. Just here in the United States, how do you think that kind of plays into the changing of the narrative around civil rights and our leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., how we kind of get this more post-racial kind of idea of all of these leaders and people we don't really hear in depth, even outside of the collegiate level, but even in elementary school or middle school or even in high school, where we get this changing of the narrative around civil rights and this sort of culture of just assimilation rather than this revolution or this resistance against the American empire. So how do you feel that we need to kind of make strides to emphasize these things in our collegiate level and outside of it?
I'm so happy you in African American Studies. She's so smart. You know what I mean? Come on out of political science. You're in the right department. Come home. You're in the right field. I think the question you have asked is an extremely important question. Here's what I would say. I would say that the lack of clear-headed explanations about what happened during the struggle for civil rights is really, we're responsible. Those of us who went through that era, we're responsible for not transmitting that information to the generations who came up. And I think that there were some problems that we had. The problems we had, I remember as a student, activist and leader, that I was head of the SNCC organization at UCLA. And I think we thought that the revolution would transform everything, and that once that transformation happened, we didn't have to explain anything else. But what happened was that the institution fought back. The institution struck back. And in its striking back, it basically shut down all the avenues that we had for explaining. So we can no longer be on TV with explanations about it. It was very rare that you would then see these explanations. But before that, you know, we had Malcolm talking, everybody was talking, and there was talk. Then they said, you know what? What was that report that was done? There was a report that came out that said the problem that has been created in America is that something could happen in one city, Birmingham, and then all of a sudden at night it's everywhere. So what the network stations did, they decided that they will just localize situations. That if something happened in Philadelphia, you will not see it in Los Angeles. And that became a pattern. I was in the communication field, so I knew how they were doing that. They said, you know what, we're not gonna make this national. And so when they didn't make it national, then the people in Los Angeles did not know that, hey, they demonstrated in Philadelphia, so we need to demonstrate tomorrow. They shut down those avenues. And I think that we were not sophisticated enough to know that the institutions and the corporations and the state would come in with that kind of power. And that it was a misjudgment on our part. I think we're smart enough. I hope.
And don't misunderstand the state coming in.
That's right.
They came in. They had people who worked for the state.
Informers.
And they appeared to be students like everyone
That's
else.
Right. Absolutely.
And they appeared to be, you know, down for the struggle.
That's
but
right.
They were down for something very different.
Absolutely.
And you know, these people are, as time goes on, they're writing books and getting a little bit of fame for having done that.
That's right.
But what they did was very powerful.
That's right.
And that had a tremendous impact. So you got a whole country, a whole apparatus, which is attempting not to tell that story, not to tell that history. That's why it's our job to tell that history. Because everybody is made dumb by that.
That's true.
Right? It's not even just us. But these white folks are made dumb by that.
That's true.
They need to hear that story because they don't know their own history. Because their history is no different than the history that we lived.
That's right.
The problem with it is that they've developed an amnesia, which allows them to give an interpretation, like you said, where we end up talking about, you know, the problem is with this group of people and what they did. The problem is, here you got this strong, tremendously strong group of women who have been the backbone of fighting against tyranny and oppression at every single level of its appearance, now being blamed for every single problem in the community.
Yeah.
And they did that.
That's
I
right.
mean, right after the Kerner Commission, they did another report, and that report said, well, but why are they protesting? Because there's too many women raising
That's right.
these children.
That's right.
Should we as scholars look for new phenomena?
Yeah, and I think we are, and I think that the field is doing that very rapidly. And if you ask me, I think that perhaps more than any other field that I can think of, unless you just went to, like, for example, a gender studies department, I think African American studies has been more progressive on the level of even gender than, say, you would find in the history department. You know, the political science department. I think we have raised those questions and we have dealt with those questions. And with that new phenomena of information as well as anybody at any field. And I think we have people who are actively doing this everywhere, every day in our field. So you're perfectly correct. And I think that to add to that with the new knowledge, I think also new technologies. I think we need that too. And I think that there are people who are beginning that process of looking at how to use new technologies and to advance ways understanding humanity by virtue of that. And I think that there's one issue, though, I think that has to be, we have to be careful about as we go into the future, that Africana studies has to do this without becoming itself a gender studies department. And that's a very tricky business, you know what I'm saying? It's like we have discussions in our field about how do we deal with questions of homophobia, for example, and questions of gayness. And then the question, though, has to be, if we were a department of gay studies or queer studies, then that's one thing. You can then have supplements in Africana studies, of courses, you see, but we cannot become a department of queer studies. That's not what Africana studies was started to do. But now, can you discuss gender in an Africana studies department? You ought to be able to do that in every Africana studies department, you see. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Let me say one thing. So, you know, I found Asante laying on that bookshelf. So this is what that did for me, is that was a challenge to the epistemology of what I could know. It was a challenge to the ontology which was implicit in what I was studying. Let me just break that down. What I could know changed. And the scope of what I could know changed. Now, what happens, you know, if you go back to the brother's question here, what does that mean for the specific disciplines? Now, if from where I stand, I deem that these disciplines are overly endowed with a white supremacist ideology, which is what I mean when I say Eurocentrism, then what happens when that falls? Well, what happens when that falls is the integrity of those disciplines has fallen. So for me, Africana studies then now suggests that I cannot go back and simply do the sociology I used to do unless I ignore that. I cannot go and do the economics that I used to do unless I ignore that. So since now the integrity of the sociology, of the economics has been destroyed, what comes in its place is the real problematic. So we're offering a way to create ways to build intellectual discourse and conversation, a way which is different than these Eurocentric ways of doing it. Because these Eurocentric ways of doing it are based on lies and distortions. And so the correction to that means that you have to get out of those shoes, wear some different shoes, and then start moving forward. So if people are still practicing the same way they used to practice before that, they're going to have to justify how they do it. That's why a lot of people are fighting against Africana studies in the academy without mentioning Africana studies.
That's right.
And
That's right.
the reason they're fighting against
That's right.
it is because Africana
That's
studies
right.
uproots the basis
That's right.
of what they're about.
Sure, absolutely.
So if we raise a question, and I you know, I experienced this, I wrote a little book which challenged the integrity of the statistical methods used in the social sciences. And now you can find entire journals which are dedicated to critiquing the statistical methods and showing how this way, which I said was wrong, you don't have to use that as the basis of it. We can keep the thing if we use this other thing as the basis of it. I mean, volumes. All the major journals have held sessions on it. They've written tons of books on it, and they never cite that little book that I wrote.
That's right.
Now, it's not that they're not in argument with the book,
Right.
But they ain't gonna cite the book, because to cite the book would be a legitimating act showing what they're fighting against and why they need to maintain econometrics the way that it is. Why they need to maintain the predictive ability that they have in political science and sociology and anthropology when they use these statistical methods. Why must they maintain this? Rather than, why don't they confront the lies, change what they're doing, and if they do that, they will start changing their own epistemology. They will start saying, oh, I don't have to sit here and do what some people call policy analysis, which becomes basically, how do I make sure that things stay the way they are? Which is what we teach people to do. And we teach them to go in the community and maintain the community in the situation that it's in. Maintain the inequality the way that it is. And if you're going to give any relief, keep the system integrity, keep the integrity of the system there. So I think that it's really important to understand what work has been done. If you shatter the basis of something, now that thing no longer has a foundation. And if it no longer has a foundation, it is crumbling down. So when they're making a lot of these arguments, all they're trying to do is put brick and mortar to keep those buildings up, even though they have no foundation. Now, Africa, we know about this, because people have been building on sand for a long time. And they know when you build on sand, you have to constantly rebuild everything. So if you go to Timbuktu, and you go to Djengeribert, the big mosque there, you will see that mosque, and it will only look, you can only see so much of it. But if they take an x-ray of it, you will go down, about a mile, and that same mosque will be looking just like the one you're looking at, but they have been rebuilding it and developed techniques so that it continues to look the same, but is going up because that's how sand moves, okay? But now, these folks ain't got no foundation down there. You do an x-ray, there's nothing. So this is a challenge for how we go forward. And if we go forward, we cannot use the same basis. So for me, I'm very concerned that we not lock ourselves. We need to, as we go forward, we need the new technologies and we need additional languages. We need to speak more than one language. No way we could trap ourselves just speaking English, thinking we're going to talk about Africana.
Right.
We need to increasingly speak more, and you can never be too old.
That's right.
Okay? Cannot be too old. I'm still learning language.
That's right.
And so we need to think and speak in more languages, and in using social media or whatever comes after social media, television and video, the radio, every single medium that there is.
I think that there is just one point in terms of just this whole idea of not recognizing what we have done, as Professor Zuberi said, in terms of him writing about statistics, and they just simply go ahead and deal with things without referring to it. This is the same thing that's happened to Afrocentricity. Particularly if you look at women's studies. Women's studies has a theory that they call standpoint theory. You know what the standpoint theory came from? It came from Afrocentricity. The whole idea of the place, the notion of perspective. If you read the definition of standpoint, they come right out of it. But they won't ever say, we got this from Afrocentricity. You see what I'm saying? So that's what happens over and over again.
And my question has to deal with W.E.B. Du Bois' book, The Philadelphia Negro.
All right.
And if you can speak to that in conjunction with Philadelphians' reaction to what happened to me and my family, and also the clergy, how the black clergy, responded in support of Wilson Good rather than against what happened. I think W.E.B. Du Bois, spoke a lot to the attitude of the Philadelphia Negro.
Let me just say this. I don't know whether anybody recall, but right after the MOVE situation, I wrote an article for the Philadelphia Inquirer, actually attacking Wilson Good. And a lady who worked for him at the time, but who became someone that I knew in other places, circumstances, it was sent to me. Her name was Karen Warrington. You may know Karen. Karen was sent by Wilson Good to talk to me because she was working at the as a communication. So she comes to Temple, and my article had attacked Wilson Good because I did not appreciate the fact that he said that if he had to do it again, he'll do it again. That's what he said. So Karen came, had lunch with me at the Diamond Club at Temple, and she said, you know, the mayor wanted you to know that all things are political, and that he didn't appreciate the fact that you have written that article for the Philadelphia Inquirer about, you know, the action to move. And I said to Karen, I said, Karen, the one thing that's good about Molefi Asante is that I've never been intimidated. And secondly, I'm a full professor at Temple University. And that means, what that means is that presidents come and go, but full professors remain. Mayors come and go, but there's nothing that you can do. I said the position that he took was a position against the African American community. You cannot take that position. So I want to say to you that DuBois understood also the attitude, of course, of the Philadelphia Negro. This whole, but he was mainly concerned about was statistically trying to figure out who we were. You know, and he wanted to know how many barbers we had, how many churches, you know, how many funeral directors and so on. But he also understood that there was a peculiarity to this situation in terms of the African American population and the African American people in Philadelphia. And a lot of people say a lot of things about us in Philadelphia, but overall, I think that we have some good and bad.
Let me say this. I think the Du Bois of the Philadelphia Negro is different than the Du Bois of Black Reconstruction. So the Du Bois of the Philadelphia Negro, he does offer a critique of the clergy. He offers critique of the elite classes. And he offers a critique that they did not pay enough attention to the uplift of the everyday African American. Now, what he meant by uplift in the Philadelphia Negro was that they were not showing the average African American how to become a good American citizen. A good American citizen, because that is in part what the mandate of the book that he was writing at that time had set out to do, and that was to kind of provide an analysis of the, as Professor Asante said, to describe the community in itself. But those who were paying for the study wanted the community described because they were concerned about the election and whether they would win the election. So there was a certain politics that motivated them. Du Bois's genius allowed him to go beyond those limitations, but in some ways, the relationship to what he was saying, he did offer critique, but his critique and what he saw as a solution, I think, were not so different than those who would say that becoming like everybody else was the goal of what the actions of those in power and those who were wealthy should be. Okay? So I don't think there. But I think the Du Bois of Black Reconstruction basically said America's made a fundamental mistake. It had an opportunity to reconstruct democracy. And it was given that opportunity by the great efforts that Africans engaged in to win the Civil War. So the formerly enslaved were the decisive force in winning the Civil War. And in doing that, they attempted to reconstruct what democracy meant. And what that meant is tearing down some of the class barriers. and some of the interpretations of those class barriers. And now, and the reason I invoke that particular book, and there are many others that give this dynamic comparison of Du Bois's brilliance, is that I think a response which looked at the situation and simply didn't demand a kind of normative interpretation of what people should have been doing and how they should be living and how they should be acting and what the city could do in response to people not doing what they thought they should do would have been totally different. So Good making that statement would not be a statement that could come out of Black Reconstruction.
Right.
But I'm not sure it couldn't come out of
The
the Philadelphia Negro.